Welcome to the Gusset pickup and shaping part of our sock tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at where you are, and the first thing you're going to do is knit across your heel stitches and go back to working in the round. So we're going to pick up the stitches along the heel flap, knit across our instep stitches, and then we're going to knit down the other side of the heel of the flap. People say this is the trickiest thing about knitting socks, but actually it is the most satisfying. So the first thing you're going to do is knit across your heel stitches. If you are changing colour, I would recommend either doing it before you knit across here or just after it, whichever suits you. Now, when we get to this point, we're going to put away the needle in our left hand. Some people use a needle to pick up here. I don't. I think it's just less fiddly when you do it by hand. So what you're going to see is here we have all of the slip stitches that we did when we were knitting the heel flap, and this is why you slip them, because they are much easier to find when you want to pick up stitches at this point. So I have 9 stitches to pick up in the size pattern that I'm following. So what I do is I sometimes find them out to make sure that I can find all 9, and I'm happy that I've done enough rows in my heel flap, and then I go and I pick them up. So I pick them up and knit them. Not quite a pick up in the traditional sense of it. So all you do is you insert your needle between under both bars of the slip stitch, like so. So you go in and make sure that you pick up both bars and you knit around underneath those to create a knit stitch, and you pull that through. And that is how you create your stitches when you're picking up along the edge. And again, you go into the stitches, and you can see that you don't pick up 3, you make sure that you just pick up the 2 bars. Make sure you're far enough out at the end of the edge of the flap to make sure that you're picking it up in the right place. So you knit into that. Then you do that 7 more times, depending on the size of the sock you're knitting, and then you pick up all of those stitches along that edge. You can mark there, you can put a marker at the end of your heel flap stitches, but in such a small number, it's easier just to keep counting. But if you were using, maybe if you had a 4-ply yarn and you had a lot more stitches in your heel, then you might put a marker. Avoid picking them up in 1s and 2s, pick them both up again together. Some patterns will tell you slightly different things, and then I would just do what the pattern says. So if you knit into all of those stitches all the way up along to pick up the 9 stitches as specified in the pattern. So once you've picked up all of your stitches, you will see that they're actually in a really neat little row if you've done it correctly. So you'll have the 2 bars of your slip stitches behind the needle, just here, and then at the front of the needle you'll also have a row of stitches, and they're a line of stitches, and they're the next line of stitches that you would have done as you knit your flap. What you're going to do now is you're going to pick up 2 more stitches along that line, because if you were to knit straight into your instep stitches, that would leave you with a little hole, which is something you want to avoid. So you follow the line of stitches along to see where to pick up the next 2, and if you pick them up in that line, it's really quite tidy. It's not an exact science. You may need to make yourself a little bit of space. But once you come back out, you'll see exactly where you've put that stitch. It's just in the line of stitches. And then if you do the next one just up from there as well, you will see that it goes up along the leg of the sock rather than being part of the flap. So that's how you avoid a little hole at that point, because sometimes it can get a bit gappy. So that is, you've picked up your stitches and you have knit the 2 extra stitches in the pattern, and you can see them along the nice line that you've created. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like if it's not quite right as well. I'm going to take out the stitches and the last of the slip stitches that I picked up, and I'll show you how that looks if it's not right as you come up along that line. So I'm picking up 2 of the bars along the side, And you can see that that's quite untidy and a bit loose looking. So you can see that the first stitches are picked up correctly and then the back ones are not, and it's pulling it out of shape quite a bit. So you would then go back and rework those. And because you're not picking up stitches to lose them like you would if you were doing it in a piece of knitting, you can pull them out as much as you want. And then when your socks are worn a bit and fluff up a bit where any kind of looseness in that area kind of tends to be covered up as well. So you pick those up again then along that line. Nice and tidy, ready to change needles and pick up along your and knit your instep stitches. So you can now see all of your picked up stitches in a nice neat row, and your heel stitches are there. Now I'm going to change needles before I move on to the instep. And this is important when you're using double pointed needles because you want to keep the same stitches together on the same needles so that you know what numbers they are, as you did when you were knitting at the start. So you knit across the first needle of instep stitches. And another reason it's important is that shaping will take place on either side of the instep stitches as we do the gusset, so knowing exactly where those stitches are is very important. So the next thing you're going to do then is knit the next needle of instep stitches. If you are only using 3 needles instead of 4 knitting with the 5th, you could knit all of your instep stitches onto a single needle at this point to keep them all together. That would give you quite a good idea of where you are in terms of the shaping, which is quite key. So the next thing we're going to do now, to go back to working the round, is we're going to pick up and knit the stitches on the other side of the flap. But first we're going to pick up 2 more stitches like we did on the other side. So what I tend to do when I'm doing this is I find the stitches I'm going to pick up to make sure I have all the slip stitches I'm expecting, and then I work up along the leg from that line of stitches to make sure I'm picking my stitches up in the right place. So I count them out starting from the bottom to make sure that I can see them all ready to pick up. And again you can see that they're very distinct. So once I'm happy that I've identified the top stitch, I then pick up the 2 stitches above that in the line of stitches that come up from where I would be picking those up. And you do that in the same way that you do, so there's your 9, your stitches, they're your slip stitches, and then you're coming up from those to pick up your 2 stitches. And that's how you make sure they're positioned correctly. Now it is not uncommon to start either too early or too late when you're picking up your stitches at this point, and that's something to be careful of, otherwise you'll run out of slip stitches or you'll have a bit of a gap at the bottom. Again, as I said on the other side, because these aren't really stitches for you to lose and drop and run out your knitting, you can have a couple of goes at this if you need to. So then you've picked up your 2 and now you're working into the bars of the slip stitches. Again, you're picking up both bars as you were on the other side, and you're working down a very set along the line of the stitches that are just inside those slip stitches as well. You'll be able to see very clearly. And don't split your yarn. Very funny, I had the same split yarn in the magic loop tutorial. So once you've checked that you have the right number of stitches, you are ready to knit half of the heel stitches. So you knit across those stitches, and that is going to be your new start of round. And that's quite important because you're numbered, you need to know where the needle numbers are for following the pattern that goes with this tutorial. So that's it though, you have picked up your gusset and it is all ready for shaping now. So what you have now is your untouched instep stitches, which are the same number as they were when they were picked up, and then you have your picked up stitches and half of your heel stitches on both of the other needles that you've just used to pick up those stitches. And that's quite a good arrangement. So you have needle 1 before the start of round, needle 2 after it, and then needles 3 and 4 still have your instep stitches on them as they did originally. You can see the start of round has moved and it is now at the center of your heel as opposed to being at the side as it would have been before we did this. So now that you have picked up your gusset and you've positioned your needles correctly, you are ready to continue on. You're going to start doing your decreasing on either side of the instep stitches, but the first round that you do is a knit round. So they're worked as a knit round, a decrease round, a knit round, decrease round as you shape your gusset. You decrease along the sides on both sides there. There's no change to the instep stitches as you do this, and that's important to keep that in mind. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get ready to replace your start of round marker, which is very important. And then also in this round we're going to be knitting into the backs of the stitches that we picked up. That is only done in this knit round. In the next rounds those stitches are just knit as normal. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to place a marker. So you knit the first stitch of your round and you slide on your marker, a little bit like you did when you started with the first DPN way back at the start of this. Then you just continue knitting. Now, as I said, we will knit the stitches of your heel, and then you're going to knit into the back of all of these stitches that you've just picked up along the gusset. And the reason you do this is that it strengthens those stitches and it stops you getting holes, because otherwise if you were to just knit into the front of the stitch, it would be as if you were picking up a yarn over, as you'll just see now. So it leaves you with a much bigger hole, whereas the other stitch is twisted. And if you knit it to the back of that, it'll twist it now. And that just makes it makes it a lot less gappy picking up along the side. So you do that in all of the picked up stitches and only in this first round. So in the next round, which is decreasing, and then in the next knit round, you don't do that. It's only in this round. So then you get to your instep. You're just going to work across those stitches, and you can see that all of those stitches are nicely twisted there. One of the only times in knitting where you really might want a twisted stitch. So then you knit across your instep, so you can see that there's nothing different happening here, and it's really important that that's the case. Oh, there is one point here that I didn't mention in the last piece. In the instep stitches, if you were doing a pattern on the leg originally, you might see an instruction in the pattern to keep work pattern as set. You might see work from a particular line in a chart, and you would do that here. This is a stocking stitch sock, so there's no changes to these stitches. But if you were to see it in a pattern continuous set, you would need to do those instructions, just to say that as it's a slight difference. Now again, we are after working all of the instep stitches, and we're now picking up the stitches on the other side of the heel flap, and again we're working into the back of all of those stitches. So I have a few baggy stitches there. I think it's because the yarn has had a pretty tough time at this point in the filming. They're normally a little bit tighter, but this sock has had a hard day. So you've knit into all of your stitches into the back, and then you're back to the heel stitches, and you just knit across those back to the start of the round. So you have now done your first knit round of your gusset. You're ready to do some decreasing. So your decreasing will take place 3 stitches before the start of the instep and 3 stitches in the 3 stitches at the end of your instep. But we'll show you how that works, because that's not quite the right way to put it. So you're going to decrease in along there and narrow in, and you're going to have a matching one on the other side, and then you come back to working it. Your foot will become the same size as your leg in terms of stitches when following this particular pattern anyway. Some patterns do their decreasing at the bottom towards the heel stitches. I have a pattern that does that. Again, it's knowing what you're looking for in patterns more so than thinking of them as with any pattern. So in this case, we're going to work to 3 stitches before the instep. So you can see here we're just knitting through the fronts of the stitches, as you would normally, even though we knit into the back of them last time. So we have 3 stitches before the instep, and we're going to do the first decrease, and it's a knit 2 together. So you put your needle into both stitches as if to knit them and then pull them off. And that is your first decrease of your gusset. We're now going to work across the instep stitches, and again, just to repeat from last time, if you were keeping your pattern as set, you would be doing it across here on the instep stitches. So once you've worked across those, the pattern will say work to the end of the instep stitches, or it'll tell you to work needles 3 and 4. and then it's a knit one, slip, slip, knit, decrease on the other side, and that's the paired decrease for the one you've just done. So you knit the first stitch, and then you're going to do a slip, slip, knit, decrease. Now just to say, as we do a slip, slip, knit, decrease, there is a little trick for making those a little bit more even, and on the next round you could knit into the back of that stitch just to make them in a straighter line as you do them. It doesn't make a huge difference, it's just a neat little thing in knitting, more so than it's not a sock thing at all. Just if you're doing slip, slip, knit, decreases, knitting into the back gives you a slightly more straight line when you're doing those decreases. Just a little thing. Now you're back to the start of your round. What happens now is you're going to knit another round, then a decrease round and a knit round, and you're going to do that until you are back to the number of stitches that you had for your leg, depending on the pattern, obviously in this one, and I will see you once I have all those decreases done. And that's it. You have worked the pick up and shaping of your sock gusset. You will have the same number of stitches as you had for the leg in this pattern, particularly, maybe not in all of them. If you find yourself having the wrong number of stitches, maybe you have decreased unevenly, and that there won't be a sock knitter who hasn't done that, just decrease it out over another 2 rows, so another knit row, and then maybe work out your uneven decreases. Do start the leg, do start the foot with the correct number of stitches, and be wary if you are doing that in a pattern sock or anything. But in this one, you can hide a little issue there. And in the next video, we're going to cover knitting your leg and your toe.